Hello, welcome to Insider with myself, Junior Badila. We're still following the situation in Goma, eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Currently, RDF, Rwanda Defense Force, with M23, uh, managed to capture Goma. So, according to some reports, UN report, there is several humanitarian crises in Goma. But meantime, RDF, the coalition, RDF, M23, and AFDC. AFDC is political branch of M23, Rwanda-backed rebel group. They're marching in towards Bukavu. Bukavu is another eastern part of Congo, largest city, is a capital city of South Kivu. Uh, we join now by Joseph Ochieno from Kampala, who is a refugee scholar, writer, and commentator on African affairs. Mr. Ochieno, how are you doing from Kampala?
Hi, good evening. I am well, but whether it's in London or Kampala, you can't really be saying you're very well when and if you see the clips coming from Eastern DR Congo. So I'm fine personally, but I'm very saddened that there are massacres that continue on this continent. And somebody who has lived as a refugee, lived experiences, and as a scholar, somebody who studied refugee matters and conflicts and governance on the continent, I feel extremely sad that this is still happening this day and age, but also merely in my neighborhood in Congo, and knowing very well that many of our peoples are related, but many of our peoples are substantially and directly involved in this atrocious, unacceptable development.
Indeed, we've seen yesterday President Ramaphosa of South Africa went to Harare in Zimbabwe. There was a brief summit of SADC SADC. There was a statement as well from European Union calling for Rwanda to withdraw its troop from DRC soil. Uh, do you think condemnation aren't enough to pressure Rwanda?
No, unfortunately, they're not. And if they are, they've come rather late, or rather too late, but possibly slightly different tone from where we were 1 week ago. There were exchanges of words between Paul Kagame and his Congolese counterpart, threats of war, language of war. And then the conversation extended to President Kagame and South African President et al. But it was basically statements that, in my opinion, were at the time insufficient until I think it became very apparent to SADC leaders, including South African President, that Mr. Kagame was serious. He was not backing down. I was taken a little bit aback by the fact that it would appear that SADC leaders did not, or certainly they didn't present as taking Mr. Kagame seriously. But in any case, possibly this is not a matter for SADC per se, but it's a matter for Congolese sovereignty. So the Congolese authorities, considering the fact that this is an area which has been in conflict and substantially occupied for a very long time, I don't know whether President Tshisekedi ought to have hit the drums and the alarms slightly earlier or not. But quite clearly, right now, Congo is occupied. Statements are not helping. But as I say, hundreds of thousands of innocent, particularly young women and children, are suffering. But regardless, also at the heart of this conflict, we know it's about resources too. The loot of DR Congo continues. And as far as other aspects are concerned, which is the expansion of territory, yeah, it would appear, as you said in the introduction, that Rwanda seems to continue to be, consolidating its position in DR Congo. But we also know that the factor that is not commonly talked about recently is, my own native Uganda and some of their forces in Congo. You don't hear them, and of course, this time, Mr. Museveni has learned how to not use Twitter for these purposes. It seems to be, rather mute. But we know that this is a conflict involving both Uganda, Rwanda, DR Congo, and I think some very urgent banging the table by more serious guys ought to take place. But I said SADC was a start. What else will they be saying over the next 24 hours or indeed 48 hours? I do not know.
We indeed, but we hear Kagame complaining about some rhetoric from Ramaphosa, and we listen to Burundi President Ndayishimiye claiming that they will be supporting Congo, and Uganda forces as well the quite complex involvement in Congo crisis. Do you think, Mr. Ochieno, that this is slightly degenerating into regional crisis?
It is a regional crisis. It's a regional crisis that is not being spoken about, and I think that's part of my frustration. I have been saying the last 1 week that unfortunately, I don't think it's anymore a subject for Africans and African commentators and African observers, and really, genuine and committed Africanists to be playing diplomatic tones and languages akin to those ones at the UN General Assembly, because even African diplomats at the African Union, I am a little disappointed that I'm not hearing them louder. I should be saying that, look, it's a crisis that, except for the fact that the open declaration from Kampala and Kigali, and in this case, SADC, various headquarters of different capitals from Harare to in this case maybe Johannesburg or Pretoria, it's quite clearly a conflict which is already on. So real war are taking place. And as I said, there's a lot that is going on that is not being talked about. I don't want to be the preemptor of these things, but it's real combat. And as I said, the forces from all the neighboring countries in one way or another have been actively involved. Sad that South Africa lost its citizen, but I could see that some of the leaders are actually being fired, maybe partly to settle the public opinion in some of these capitals. But quite clearly, unfortunately, the loot in Congo that started with the killing of Patrice Lumumba, meaning in more contemporary political terms, we know it started with Leopold, King Leopold started occupying and plundering Congo, but particularly from the 60s, the killing of Patrice Lumumba continues unabated. And I do not think we've had sufficient leadership either in the region or on this continent to deal with the Congolese situation.
Is that the failure of African Union? We know that currently African Union is looking to elect the new Secretary General. That's another debate. But so far, except of SADC leaders who are trying to come up with some kind of solution to resolve that crisis. And the crisis had been taken to Washington. Yesterday, during the press briefing, question has been asked to President Trump, his view with regard to the crisis in Congo. But he tried to shy away from the question. Where the solution will come from?
I think the ultimate solution for the Congolese crisis will have to come from amongst the Congolese people. I quite clearly suggest that Congolese citizens of the various political persuasions should rally around. And I think President Tshisekedi should provide the leadership. I believe the leaders of other opposition political parties should rally around the Congo question, the Congo identity, and the Congo sovereignty questions, to make sure that they speak with one voice. Unfortunately, they do not have that sufficient commonality thus far. Some of the policies of Congo. And in any case, Congo has been a substantially weak state since the killing of Patrice Lumumba. The strength that existed in Mobutu was simply that he was a stooge, an agent of imperialist Western powers. And when he collapsed, while he looted Congo together with others, and while he collapsed, the forces that got rid of him were backed by Rwanda and Uganda in the name of getting rid of this guy to bring in the other Kabila. SADC forces and SADC leaders were persuaded to support Uganda and Rwanda. Let me take Kagame and Mr. Museveni because I want to push away the people of my region from this. But turns out that it was quite clearly something to serve the interests of the two leaders, plus their other extended friends. Now, of course, the conflict that took off Mobutu, brought in Kabila one, then brought in Kabila the son, and in there particularly, we nearly saw Africa's first official world war, where SADC countries were on the one side backing the then struggling Congolese government forces against the rebels that were quite clearly Uganda and Rwanda per se. I'm saying this happened in the 90s. What happened in between then? Were there institutional frameworks within Congo that readdressed many of these things? Was there about redrawing of political and strategic borders involving SADC leaders? And of course, in any case, you can push this to 2012, 2013, when these so-called M23 guys cropped up, crying foul and allegedly seeking redress. To be fair to them, they had their own mini arguments. When there was a settlement there, M23 were relocated to Uganda. I have asked this question and I ask again, how did these guys leave Uganda? How did they leave Uganda, with their equipment, and where did they go? Did they go to Rwanda? Did they go to Congo? And where were Ugandan authorities? Has anybody asked Mr. Museveni the circumstances in which these guys, left Uganda and why? That did not happen. So as I said, Congo is basically being used as a deal, for regional interests. And because some of the leaders, in this case, Ugandan and Rwandan leaders, been used, over the last 35 or so years, as the precious boys of external interests, they've been untouchable. And to appear now, they seem to have consolidated and strengthened themselves. And now it's rather very difficult for their masters to give them instructions. As far as SADC is concerned, I don't know whether SADC today has the clarity and commitment of leadership that prevailed at the time in the late 90s when Zimbabwe and Angola, nearly, the two of them particularly, quite clearly, literally saved the fall of Kinshasa to the Ugandan and Rwandan-backed forces. Where are we today? I think those are conversations that need to be revisited. But beyond that, we talk politics, of course, and we talk politics of other external forces. At the bottom, Kagame, quite rightly, you'd argue, says that Congo harbors rebels that are threatening his country on the one hand. On the other, he quite suggests that Congolese Tutsis, the people of his ethnic association, are being mistreated in Congo. But I don't know the last time that an average Ugandan Luo would be concerned when the Kenyan, concerned to the extent of seeking to invade Kenya when Kenyan Luo's interests have been violated. But on the one hand, but on the other, if the Rwandan rebels, Rwandan, rebels against Rwandan authorities in Congo, is the best way to invade Congo, or it is for Rwanda and Congo to have a conversation about that? Now, what Kagame suggests is that Hutu rebels in Congo are a threat to Rwanda. I do not think that is going to be resolved by occupying Congo. And in any case, if there needs to have a conversation, the Ugandan rebels allegedly in Congo, the Rwandan rebels in almost certainly in Congo. Many of these are people who were pushed following the time of genocide. You could argue many of them, and I know some of them actually legitimately, well, merely legitimate refugees, people who ran away from Rwanda following the genocide. They might be associated by their ethnicity, but I don't think that simply because they were Bahutu, and Bahutu allegedly led in the genocide in Rwanda, so every Muhutu is a genocide. Now, that's not true. In any case, the genocide in Rwanda is a subject left for scholars. How did the genocide start? Who sparked it? What started it? And in this case, between Bahutu and Batusi, who killed the other and who killed the other more? Both sides did kill. So somehow, if the Banyarwanda refugees in Congo who are a threat to Rwanda, it tells you that Rwanda itself has got internal political problems that it needs to solve. You know, the issue of the harmony between Batusi, who are about 15-20%, with the Hutu, who are the other percentages who they're about in Rwanda, needs to be settled amongst the Rwandese, and the same in Congo, and the same in Uganda. So we could say that, well, M23 in this case is the only specialist rebel group that is being backed by a nation state that argues that their interests in those respective nation states are not sufficiently being controlled. So you can see the hypocrisy and double standards here. What am I saying to you? I'm making it slightly much more complex. That this is a matter that at some stage, Uganda, Rwanda, and DR Congo will have to have their political issues sorted out somehow. SADC leaders will have to be, if you like, the preemptive over supervisors. But above all, I think the African Union or somebody in Africa, an African, needs to be able to deal here, because linked to all these are question of resources, which resources are basically Congolese resources being used by actually looters who are basically serving non-African interests in Congo. In any case, Uganda itself, I am still paying as an individual because I'm a Ugandan citizen. Paying when my name, the Ugandan military regime, invaded Congo in the 90s and plundered that country. And Congo, in this case, went to court, and Uganda is still paying that, meaning I'm still paying for a war and a plunder in which I was not a party to it. And I don't know how many Ugandans in Uganda have been taken to prison. So these are questions of equality and African justice. And I'm glad, Junior, not only are you working on this radio, but I hope you're amongst the Africans with whom we can have these conversations, including scholarly conversations, but also much more new, reactivated activism, proactive, positive activism conversation where we're able to discuss Rwanda, discuss Congo, discuss Uganda, discuss Mozambique objectively as Africans, and looking back and saying, where and what would our founding parents of the 60s be saying, considering what's happening in this country and in the sub-region? It's an absolute mess, and it's a shame.
Definitely, it's a mess. You mentioned Patrice Lumumba and the looting of Congo. That's where it started, even with Belgium. Do you think Patrice Lumumba assassination is still hindering Congo's development? So this is the outcome of what happened in January 1961, or one of the factors?
No, you can't frame it in that way. Patrice Lumumba was killed so that the continuation of looting of Congo would proceed. I mean, it would continue. The looting of Congo would continue. And Patrice Lumumba was killed because he was seen as an obstacle, and in any case, definitely a future obstacle to the exploitation of Congo. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in assassination attempts on him by the same forces for the same reason. Milton Obote, who in the early 60s, immediately after independence of Uganda, sent in Ugandans to support the liberation forces, supported the Lumumba's forces in Congo, was also overthrown in part because of his commitment in supporting the stabilization of Congo, but also in part because of his leading on the anti-apartheid movement. In other words, these are African leaders who at the time stood firm to try and seek, one, to give independence and sovereignty to Africa as a continent, as African nations, as nation states, but to protect African resources and therefore hope that they can be able to invest in African people, so that today, while people are discussing Silicon Valley, that we would not be exporting coltan to other places. We would be, our industrial hub would possibly be somewhere the other end of Congo, perhaps the other end of Gabon, or perhaps the other end of Kenya, but with coltan from Congo, or perhaps somewhere Kisangani would not be what we are talking about at the moment, but perhaps the industrial hub for the modern telecommunications equipments that we're having today, possibly in that Kinshasa would be producing the aircrafts, the new age aircrafts that will be featuring in the next 30, 40, 50 years. That is what has been stopped on this African continent. And the challenge today is that unless we're able to have new leadership of you, unfortunately, you and the younger generation of Africans who say no, as I said earlier, who bang tables and say no, and don't see whatever's happening in Congo as a Congolese issue, but as a question of African continent, African peoples, and also challenge Congolese authorities, one, in terms of the legitimacy, but two, also in terms of their capacity. Same with Rwanda, same with Uganda, same actually with SADC leaders. We are going to continue being a laughingstock. Now, you mentioned President Trump. Who would expect anything major about Trump? In any case, Trump was, if you like, a counter-revolutionary element, post-Obama one, where the right-wing Anglo-Americans, thought that, look, if you like, their mini democracy was being threatened. So they came up, the likes of Sarah Palin's of those days, to invoke the spirit of, extreme right-wing America. But of course, once they brought in some conservative issues, extraordinarily, some Africans excitedly got in and saw Trump as part of their savior. Now, you know what Trump has said about this continent. Trump is not going to bother, and I don't expect in any case, in average American president, whoever they are, to bother about our problem. They don't. As I said, Trump is a manifestation of that. But regardless of what they do, these are issues that pertain to us. Now, a quick observation, though. In many cases, people tend to say that, look, we do not have the power, we don't have the capacity. These guys overwhelm us. I think if these guys overwhelm us, we should begin to make it slightly harder for them to penetrate through to us. And number two, we should at least begin to be having not only elected leaders, but leaders with a mandate. But not only leaders with mandate, but leaders with Africanist vision. And not only leaders with Africanist vision, but leaders that show us with evidence that they're not what we would call Nyampalas, head men, instructors, mini students, agents of these forces. At the moment, many of the leaders we have are basically those agents.
Thank you, Joseph Ochieno. Just last one. I know now you mentioned about the week of governance in Congo. We've seen the fall of Goma and FRDC, Congolese National Army, lack capacity. That's why South African troop SANDF are on the ground. There was a Malawi troopers as well. Some Peruvian, I think, from MONUSCO, UN forces. Meantime, RDF, M23, and AFDC, they continue their fight. They're saying that they may reach in Kinshasa. And President Tshisekedi does not want to negotiate with the rebel group. He keeps insisting that he will negotiate, go on the Rwanda Accord with President Tshisekedi. What could happen?
It's difficult to tell what will happen at this time. Quite clearly, as I said, yes, the Congolese state is a weak state, and as I said, it has been a weak state since independence. And as I said, in the 60s, Uganda under Milton Obote attempted to support, in this case, the Congolese rebels. But this is a Congolese, meaning Congolese nationalist rebels. But of course, it was not a Congolese state. And as I said, in this case, particularly because Milton Obote was overthrown, and particularly because Mobutu came in and perfected the art of a client regime, that was not possible. So since Mobutu, we've not had the stabilization. So as I said, my concern, and it was a big frustration, that once SADC leaders saw the reality and sought to protect the collapse of Congo, in the 90s, I am surprised that there was insufficient focus on building capacity around the Congolese state and around the Congolese state in a manner in which they would have been looking slightly much more forward in a way. But of course, Kabila 1 came and Kabila 2, and Kabila 2 was a buddy with these guys in many ways. And as I said, with the coming of President Tshisekedi, I'm not quite sure whether we can say that he could have done a lot more than what he has done thus far, considering the time. I don't think, though, that he expected that his opponents, the other side, would possibly act this quickly. I don't know. In fact, on that one, I don't want much to comment. But I think where Congo is at the moment, SADC really needs to up its game authoritatively. Now, the irony is that Congo is also now a member of the East African community. I'm giggling because I've got strong views on this, including the criteria that is used for these nation states. And as I say, it's just almost like mini business by heads of state without looking at the underlying issues. Because really, Congo and Uganda and Rwanda ought not to be, fighting in this. But the M23 allies and whoever they're supporting them are nation states. These guys are equipped. These guys are sort of ready for war. I know that Congo is possibly intelligent, not quite, but the Congolese side definitely know what we're not discussing. So quite clear as a battle. I think the other side is trying to be possibly shy. Maybe, I don't know. This is not my area of expertise, but I suspect that whatever happens, one side may have to blink, but I think it's possibly less likely to be the M23 Rwanda sides, because I think they think that they have the capacity and capabilities and they're prepared for much longer. One other thing that I seem to see is that their side seems to be having better press and better manner in which to articulate public opinion of it, and the public opinion on the other side of it seems to think that they're almost like mini liberators, they're almost like certainly mini victims. I think the Chikesedi side needs to be able to up its game, both in practice on the ground and also in terms of public opinion. Whatever happens, I really hope that we shall be able to see Congo supported to retain itself as a sovereign state, rather than Congo, where we focus as seeing them as people who are responsible for their own problems, because generally they're not. They could do better. But also, I think Congolese state, as I said, the current Congolese state, I think the leaders need to be able to look at and consider what really their bigger priorities are than anything else that they're doing. So, in other words, maybe they may need to be looking less at economic index, both for themselves as leaders and the country generally, but more for focus on making sure that they're secure and their territorial integrity is respected. Sadly, the Eastern DRC, as I said, has been like this for a long time. It's quite far off from Kinshasa. It's a rather difficult place. DR Congo is huge. And I think it needs some urgent big thinking from Kinshasa and big thinking from friends of Kinshasa, but also bigger thinking for Africans who would be able to bring all the parties together and basically seek restraint for them. Because in any case, whatever happens, none of the sides is going to be winning militarily in a manner in which is sustainable long term. End results, it will have to be diplomacy. End results, it will have to be common sense. End results, Africa must win, not individual groups.
Definitely. Thank you, Joseph Ochieno. We shall be Congo regain its sovereignty. But meantime, we need to see Kinshasa with big thing in terms of strategy and priority. Thank you, Joseph Ochieno. I remind our listeners, you are a writer, a refugee scholar, and a commentator on African affairs. You were joining us from Kampala. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So thank you for listening to us. We will catch up with you next time for another subject around African affairs. Thank you. It was Inside Out. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.